Friday, okay. Okay.
All right. I'll do that. I'll use the Sue Tamel camera here. It is now 6 o'clock on Monday, the 7th of April. So I will call this workshop of the P&Z and Subdivision Ordinance Committee to order. Just to remind everybody, the reason we are doing this as a P&Z workshop is so that all the members of the P&Z can participate. However, the subdivision ordinance is a work product of the Subdivision Ordinance Committee, of which Chase and David and Kim and Mitch are members. So this is really just to make it more open for everybody. But technically, the P&Z will make no decision on any of this tonight. It's just an advisory consultative meeting. So we have had a draft circulated. I know most people have had a chance to peruse it in great detail. It's had a number of changes, many of them kind of modest since the last meeting. When we last met a week, was it only a week ago? Gosh, seems like forever. There were a couple of big open questions, and I think Stephen and others have made good progress the last week towards resolving those or coming up with at least the right questions to ask. So I think what I'd like to do first is I think we might as well, since we've got visitors here, we might as well do, Sheila, is this a public hearing or just public input? Public input. Okay, so we'll do some public input here before we get going, so we can incorporate whatever that public input might be into whatever we work on later. So I guess the first one we have here is surprise, Ted Stranzer. So Ted, you want to come on up and grab a microphone here in the witness booth or wherever, and
good evening, everyone. Ted Stranzik, 1020 North Berry Trail Court.
Is this the same as what was sent out? Have there been any other revisions?
The packet on top of the notebook is the most recent.
So the one this is more recent than the one you sent me out?
yes, but they're very minor changes.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
And they do incorporate, by the way, what Ted Stranzik, Ted sent me some comments yesterday. I incorporated them in what I sent Stephen, and Stephen has incorporated them in the one that's on the top. So Ted's comments are already in here.
Thank you. A little bit of my comments are redundant from last week, and that is that we've got to make this document something that is the foundation for this community. And it is absolutely important that it be done correctly and be done legally. And I'd like to hear quite a bit from our attorney today about the legal aspects of this document, and if there are specific areas, words, terms that really need to, are they properly defined, and do they cover what we want as a community? And I don't know what your review has been, but I look forward to a rather comprehensive conversation in that area. Number two, let's keep to the agenda. Last agenda was a little bit awkward, and we've got an awful lot to discuss. There's a lot of graphs. There's a lot of information that needs to be covered. And I would appreciate that everyone kind of stick to the agenda. So thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Anyone else for public comment?
Can I make one suggestion?
Absolutely.
Since this is where we're going to hear most of our legal advice on this, anybody who wanted public input might want to do it after hearing what has been said. So I would suggest that you do it both at the beginning and at the end.
Happy to do that. Just as a reminder, again, this is a workshop, no specific action taken. So the more we get, the happier we are. We've got some candidates for council, and they are here with us today. So welcome, Janai and Jeff and Victoria. So glad to have you here, and your input is certainly welcome before, after, or wherever this goes. But again, I ask you to give your comments to the subdivision committee, not necessarily the P&Z. I mean, we can listen to them here, but address them to them. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
So why don't you introduce yourself, Matt, and tell everybody what you have done thus far with this
Sure,
document.
I'd be happy to. My name is Matt Butler. I work at the law firm Boyle and Lowry. We've been appointed to be the town attorney for Copper Canyon. My role, and I guess you could call it, is an assistant city town attorney, with Stan being the lead attorney. I have read this from beginning to end. I have made many revisions that I think needed to be made. I've read dozens and dozens of subdivision ordinances. I'm comfortable with this one. Even early in my career, I even wrote one. So that the things that I was concerned about, I changed, and you'll see some of the recommendations. But other than that, I think we might be fine.
Great. And so did you listen in on our last one?
Yes, sir.
So Ted, he was attending remotely our last meeting.
Yeah, and I made changes based on what I heard and listened. So that
So
was based
in
on
this document, again, just to be clear, some of the red lines in here are a result of Matt's comments. It's not, so this is not, he's already kind of given his comments to where we are today. Okay. Why don't I turn over to Stephen to talk about what he's incorporated and what kind of open issues he still thinks we need to resolve.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The ordinance is very close, and I do really appreciate the efforts that have been made in the last week. We've made several changes. Those do highlight in red lines. I think one of the things that we wanted to kind of look at was building permits. One of the issues that we had talked about was that what is it that is allowed for building a building permit, and what does it require for plat? We still have kind of, most communities do require that if you are building a brand new primary structure, that you need to plat the property, regardless of the size of the property. If you're building a new primary structure, typically, if you already have a primary structure on the site, being a resident or something to that effect, and then you are going to build an accessory structure, be it a barn, be it a stable or other kinds of storage or whatnot. Typically, you would not have to plat based on that if there's already a pre-existing primary structure on the property and the property is not platted, which happens a lot.
And while you're at, why don't you kind of correlate that to what we've got in the document? Kind of show us
Sure,
how that's incorporated.
So I'm on here already. We're on section 1.5E.
Yes.
Under building permits.
Right.
So,
Is there a page?
9.
So in regards to this, the number one is, I don't think under question. What that does is that there is a new development that is being brought forward, and it has not been recorded. Plat's been approved. We're still working on public improvements. Then we're not going to issue a building permit until we accept that and it has been recorded with the county. Because then if you can record the county, then you can sell the property, but we're still wanting to make sure that there is all the public improvements have been accepted by the town and other public entities that are, water in that regard. So we're looking at subparagraph 2 there. In order for the town to issue a building permit for unplatted parcels. Previously, it had said unplatted parcels or unplatted tracts. Going back to the original subdivision of property by the state of Texas when original surveyors came, and that's where you get your abstract numbers and so the original legal documentation of property in the state.
So let me make a suggestion. Instead of you kind of going through every one of our problems, why don't we do them one at a time and try and nail them down while you're talking about it? Right? In other words, let's focus on this issue, because this was like, let's see if we can resolve the language on this before we move to the next problem.
Right. And okay, I will absolutely do that. So the change that I made was to create where we would plat for unplatted parcels not intended for a future subdivision. Meaning that if we have an agricultural piece of property that wants to be used as a single family home and not going to further subdivide it, then you would be able to issue a building permit onto that piece of property because you're not going to future subdivision on it.
Okay, so I guess my first thought there is that nothing is forever, and what may not be platted today could be very easily subdivided tomorrow. So I guess the phrase "not intended for future subdivision" to me was not precise enough.
I can comment on that.
Oh, yeah.
I had the same reaction. I had the same reaction that you did. But then I started thinking about it. It's really not that big of a deal, because if the person, let's say they sell the property and that person wants to subdivide it, they're still going to have to do something with that house that is already constructed on the property.
So they're going to have to come back with a plat anyway.
Exactly.
For the next
Right.
whatever.
And I've seen it a lot where there's one, you've got one house that's on this massive property, and they're selling it and then they subdivide it and house goes away. And so it says not intended for. We're not going to be able to really enforce that. But the way you do enforce it is if somebody comes back with the plat application and you apply the standards.
So, and I hear you. So it puts ambiguity in it. So to me, either you leave it out or you make it more within the next 5 years or something. It just seems it does call into mind. If you and I both have the same question, then everybody else is going to have the same question. So to me, since it's unenforceable, why bother?
Could you tie it to the property owner? So that as long as it's the property, not intended for future subdivision by the property owner.
Well, you'd have to say the current existing property owner, because
Right.
they can always give it to their kids or
Thank you.
whatever.
The question is, does it add any value by having it in there,
Right.
right?
Yes.
I mean, if it creates some confusion, fine. Does it add value that offsets the confusion it potentially creates?
Yeah. To me, it doesn't, but anybody else have a?
Is that statement necessary?
I think that's where we're going.
That's where we're
I think
going.
that's exactly
To me,
where
it's
we're
not
going.
necessary because
Yeah.
he said we can't enforce it. So
Does it change the meaning to remove it?
no, not in my opinion, because it says
I don't think so either.
for unplatted parcels, unplatted parcels.
Yeah, I think to Jeff's point, it is related to the ownership of it, but it's always going to be related to the ownership of it. So establishing the current owner is less relevant than just if it happens to be unplatted presently at the time of the application, right? For the building permit.
So
I think it means the same thing to just take it out.
that would be my suggestion. Does anybody object to that? I mean, is there anybody that firmly feels it has to be there? Okay, I suggest we just delete that phrase, not intended for future subdivision. And by the way, up above that on D1, Stephen, at the end of the first line, it says no public improvements. We did a definition, so maybe you want to capitalize the public improvements up there in D1, first line.
How does this overlay with our definition of a subdivision? The whole 4-lot thing that.
I'll let Stephen address that.
Because the two kind of
Right.
overlap for me in my head when I think through this.
So how does this explain to us why 4 lots or less doesn't apply here?
So the 4 lots or less is that, if you are going to minor plat something, you're going to create a subdivision of 4 lots or less. That is a minor plat. And the other aspect of it is that you are not creating new infrastructure, public infrastructure. So new water line to service. Now, if you've got your existing street, public or private, it's already existing, all your 4 lots are going to face onto it, or however you're configured, and you're gonna have service lines to that lot. The service lines are not public improvements. That from the meter to your home that you're building is private. You're owning it, so it's still not a public improvement.
So go to in the
So
new
by
draft.
definition, it's not a subdivision.
Yeah, go to page
No,
46. It is, you can't not, a subdivision is cutting land in pieces, so it's always a subdivision. But it is exempt from these ordinances. It's
So
not
this is-
exempt,
okay.
it's handled as a minor plat. So go to page 46 on the part that was just handed out, because has already had its changes accepted, so it's a lot less confusing than the one that was in our book. It's 3.7 minor plat on page 46 of the new handout. And look through that.
Yeah, I think I had.
So again, a minor plat is 4 lots or less, and you do not create any need for additional water lines or additional sewer lines or additional streets. They can all build their own private driveways to access the street. They can build their own water lines to connect the home to the meter at the public line. Additionally, that the biggest aspect of it is that it gets submitted to the town. Town staff reviews a minor plat, and then gives comments. Changes are made, and then once those changes are acceptable to the town staff approves the minor plat. What that does is that removes need to go to a planning and zoning commission and to the city council for approval. It does not, the biggest aspect of plat is not only the subdivision of the property, but it is the assurance that any new subdivision that creates public improvements are going to be built correctly to the town standards. That is the biggest aspect from the town's perspective of having platting process. The other aspect of it is making sure that it gets appropriately recorded with the county so that it can be then separated into lots that can be then taxed by the various taxing entities that are required for that.
So that's why even with 4 or less, you still need to have a process and record it.
Right. So you'll still have a minor plat.
You'll still have a minor plat.
So when we say, I think the number is 44% of Copper Canyon is unplatted,
Mhm.
are we saying then that 44% we should maybe have minor plats then?
No, it is unplatted. It's just a fact of life. It is.
So let me try to repeat everything I've heard so far concisely and see if I get it, right? So if I own a piece of land that is unplatted, but it already has a primary residence on it, if I want to put a barn on it, I do not need to plat it with what we're talking about here.
Correct.
If I buy a piece of land and want to put a house on it from scratch, it's going to need to be platted because it's a primary residence going on a piece of land, a new piece of land, right? Correct so far?
So if you want to
I'm trying to
divide
start at the
into four,
basics.
into
Yeah.
4 lots.
No, just a single. I'm buying I'm buying 2 acres. I'm going to put a house on it.
Right.
Right.
And if I heard the committee correctly last time, you wanted some sort of exception to allow staff to issue a building permit if it's just 1 lot.
I'm
Right.
talking about platting or not platting. I'm starting with this whole thing about does it
Right.
get platted or not?
Yeah.
I think you got to back up first to building permit.
Yeah.
Before you get to the plat, you got to start with, do we require a building permit? And then from there decide
Okay.
where does it fall in this.
But presumably I'm building a house,
So you need a
building permits.
Right.
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 That just seemed like a given. So.
Yes, yes.
But you don't need to plat.
No, you don't.
Okay.
No.
So let's change it a bit. So I bought 5 acres. I built 5 acres that had a house on it. It was not platted, right? I put a barn on it, didn't need to plat it. Now I want to split it in half. Now I'm going to subdivide it into 2 lots and I will have to plat it in order to split it in half, right? So
Correct.
that's where the plat
The minor.
occurs. The minor plat occurs in this scenario.
That's correct.
And a minor is anything under 4. Right? So the 40, whatever the percent is that's unplatted today, which presumably has, most of those I would assume have primary residences, they're fine. They're sort of grandfathered in, doesn't matter. They can put a barn on them or what, whatever based on our accessory building, and they're fine. If any of those 44% go to subdivide, go to split it, then they will have to plat at that point in time.
And I'll even add, so for those that are on, they have one, structure, one residence on unplatted property and something catastrophic happens and they lose that residence, there's still the exception that we wrote into here that staff can issue a building permit if it's just one lot
All right.
or one parcel that's not
I
being
think I'm tracking.
subdivided.
Okay, are we unusual having that high of a percentage of unplatted properties?
No.
Is that pretty common?
It's especially in rural areas, and the thing is that you've got historical ownership of properties here, and so they've been, they have consolidated or split over time, and the platting process in general is fairly new to the state of Texas. It's only been really since the 1950s that platting has been really
Standard.
Especially into rural areas. And that's why you still have hereditary type of things in the Texas government code that says, well, if you're just going to split properties by needs and bounds of 5 acres or more, you don't have to plat.
And we've got that in.
And we have that.
Yeah.
That's straight out of the Texas local government.
Okay, so
Thank you.
I have one more question though. What about lots of record? How does that play into all this?
It's kind of synonymous. We're talking about unplatted property. It's a lot of record.
Because that's been a point of confusion over the years. If someone brings in a lot and they want to build, but it's a lot of record, it's been somewhat, even though it's not platted, it's a lot of record. In other words,
It's
drawn
unplatted.
off before the town was incorporated. So therefore,
it's unplatted. And that's what we're
Okay.
talking about unplatted.
okay, very good.
Okay, so Chase was gonna.
Just with the hypothetical real quick, if you've got, somebody's got a 2-acre lot with a house on it, but they also own, a lot of these unplatted parcels, I say lot, just a tract, needs and bounds, 2 acres, but they have a couple of them, so they have, 10 acres in total, but they're separate, they bought them separately. Those don't have houses on them. Would this then trigger that, if they want to build a barn on the non-house 2-acre tract, to have to plat that?
Describe that again.
I got that.
All right, you own 10 acres.
Okay, so, but first, it doesn't matter if they own multiple parcels over, you gotta go parcel by parcel.
Right, yeah, if the structure that doesn't,
Go back.
you want to build a structure that doesn't have a house on it, but your house is right
Unplatted.
next to it, and they're both unplatted.
But they're separate part, and you've got a lot of separate
And
parts.
there's, would that trigger that, and I'm talking about a 2-acre, smaller than 5, for example.
Answer's no.
Just to build a
Separate parcels.
barn, no.
It's from the perspective of the property that you're building the accessory building on.
Yeah.
So in that case, no, because you can build, you would need a building permit presumably. for
Well,
this,
true, but you have no
But
house.
not plat.
I think,
It's already a parcel of land. So if you just read part 2, if it's already a parcel of land, regardless of size, and all you want to do is put a building permit, pull a building permit, that's unrestricted. Based on.
That's what I
Sense
read,
two.
yeah.
I mean, you're still having to meet zoning standards
Right,
on that
right.
lot, but, other kinds of things, but we're not going to force you to plat that lot unless you decide to further subdivide it.
Right.
Then we
That's how I
plat it.
read it. So
Yeah.
that's-
Okay, so, does any, sorry, Matt.
Sorry, I just want to add one thing here. When I first heard you guys talking about this exception, and I was a little bit concerned because, I've seen so many times in my career, neighbors have built over neighbors' lines and got in the middle of neighbor disputes. But then when I read what's required, the survey and all those things, that gives staff everything they need to determine whether, they can issue a building permit or not. So I'm comfortable with it.
Right. So what I was gonna say is, unless anybody up here has comments, let's try and put a stake through this one. Does anybody, we can take public input on this issue. Does anybody have a question about what they've heard on what our 4 acres, our 4 lots or less and building permits? Kim, you had questions last time. Are you clear?
I'm
You're
good.
okay?
Yep.
Anybody in the room have a question, or can we move on to another topic? Yay, one down. Okay, so, yeah, hey, we're only 25
That
minutes
was
in, not
actually the
bad.
biggest one though.
Well,
No.
there you
See, there you go.
Okay, so let's talk, just for grins, let's move to an easier topic like fences. Okay, so in our last meeting, we had a lot of discussion about fences have to be permitted. And people said, well, where does it say that? And so Troy has done research and he can tell us what the facts are about our existing rules for fences. And then we can see how much we want to incorporate in here, if anything.
So currently we have fencing standards. If you're going to use it for screening, if you live along a major roadway, those type things. And
Around
so
the swimming pool.
so there's some standards in which fences should be built in certain circumstances. So for whatever reason, we never created a fee associated with pulling or requiring a fence permit. So what we've kind of done over the last couple of months is when somebody says, hey, I want to build a fence, we can't charge them for that permit, but at least we want to be able to say, here are the standards. So submit what you would like to build so that we can make sure that it meets our standards. And so that's kind of the rule that we've been kind of going by over the last, say, 6 months to a year. We need to change our fee schedule to reflect that there's a fee for that review process. Because what we're trying to avoid is a person's coming in and all of a sudden they want to build a 10-foot fence. Well, based on our standards, they can't do that. Or somebody, now that we have subdivisions that are on board and they have drainage easements in their backyards, we don't want somebody to build a fence that would obstruct that drainage easement. And so by having folks come in, fill the permit out, that gives us some sense of review and to say, hey, based on our standards, you can't build a solid fence over a drainage easement because it would obstruct that particular flow.
The point of the discussion about fences is to help the town citizens so they don't put in a fence that doesn't meet our codes. And then they got to go tear it down. So to me, the point of having this discussion about fences is with the town staff is to help the homeowners or the property owners to do the right thing. The fact that we have all of these standards implies to me that you have to get a permit. Now, it doesn't actually say anywhere that you have to get a permit. And the fact that we haven't had a fee kind of makes you think, well, if there's no fee, then there must be no requirement. So it seems to me we need to resolve this, maybe not in this document, but somewhere else, that yes, you must have a permit to do a fence. It doesn't have anything to do with platting and all that other stuff. You gotta have a permit to do a fence. My personal suggestion, don't shoot me, was no fee, because this isn't a big deal. Now, maybe you do a lot of them and it takes a lot of staff time and maybe a fee is warranted, but I personally was not proposing that we do a fee for this permitting. So in other words, the only corrective action that I thought we ought to do is somewhere, so you gotta have a permit to do a fence. That was kind of the limit of my thoughts on it. So, but this depends on council, I guess, and staff to come up with something to resolve this.
Is that interior and exterior fences?
We'll have a workshop.
I mean,
on this.
What's the difference?
Well, I mean, a
They're all
fence that's
outside,
on your
right?
outside that impacts your neighbors versus.
Yes, that's
a perimeter.
exactly
Thank
that.
you.
That's that and.
So perimeter and interior.
Because an interior as well, because if you got a swimming pool, you gotta put a thing around your swimming pool, you're required to do it. Or if you're Chase and you wanna put a barbed wire fence across the flood zone, it's gotta be the right, it can't be a solid brick wall fence, it's gotta be a 3-strand barbed wire or something, right? So I think that the fences question was resolved in what Stephen proposed on the language. You saw the language, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What section is that in? Because I have a question. I don't know if it's
Yeah, it was in the.
It's in the perpetual maintenance agreement language. This is something that if you have a drainage easement on your plat, you have a floodplain, floodway on your plat, then you would place that language on the plat so that the perpetual maintenance easement would be that, what we're trying to do is protect the town from having to go and
Clean your fence.
That I understand. Yeah, my question's totally unrelated to that. So, okay, I got it. Thank you. I appreciate
So
it.
no problem. So we also, what we did was we clarified from last conversation that, if you can build a fence in a fence, meaning that it would be assumed that the fence would be permitted. Just as a side note, one of the biggest things you permit a fence is make sure your fence is going to be on your property.
Yeah.
Bingo.
That's the number one issue. You can be so high or whatever, what materials, whatever. It's most important that the town make sure that it's on the property.
Right.
So.
And not in the road even. We've got specifically, we have that in our engineering ordinances, the fence between your property and a public road. It's got to be on your property, not in the easement. So that's already written into the other sections.
So what we put in was a fence which would impede water flow. And so there is a little bit of interpretation on that. We want to make sure that animals can't cross over the fence, but we want to make sure that water flow is going to be able to. One of the things I might also suggest, and I've done in other cities and implementing fence permits, is that for new fencing is where you permit and pay a fee if a fence needs to be replaced due to damage or a section of the fence that you might not charge a fee for damage to the fence. Or if you're replacing, having to put in a new line, again, that's having to double check against a survey or plat, make sure you're staying on your property.
So let the staff take that under advisement when they propose something to the council. Okay, so Chase, you are our fence guy. Are you okay with what this is in here now? Or are you willing to live with what's in here now, I should say?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole actual fence and what we like for fences to look like, that's outside of this document. The way this is written seems fine to me.
Okay. So anyone else have
I still have a fence issue.
Absolutely,
Okay.
go ahead.
And I don't know if it's in here or not. So, and it may be part of where Chase was just alluding to. So in almost every public hearing we have for a development, right, 4 or more, one of the neighbors asks about the perimeter fence for the development, right? And we have basically, as I understand it, have always said, we can ask the developer to make the fence the same everywhere, and we smile and we say, can we do that? But do we have anything, and is this the place, or should it be somewhere else, that we standardize that? And I'm not necessarily saying what that fence needs to be, but that it should be the same, that it's not, they don't leave each lot open to interpretation. So you end up with a wood picket fence on the first lot and a pipe fence on the second lot and that kind of thing.
So absolutely do that in your zoning ordinance.
Yeah.
You can absolutely control interior fence types. You can control their height, materials. You can even control that whether they're board on board with a flat top. You can call them all cedar. It doesn't matter what you got, as long as you can control aesthetics. Materials you can control on fencing, because the state did not include fencing when they said we want to control
Building materials.
As they all said on structures.
Okay.
A fence is not a structure.
A lot of times the architectural documents in the HOA documents.
But yeah, I think the answer to that is we're going to have development agreements with any developers. We can put that in the development agreement.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that if it needed to go in here now, while we've got it open, this is the time to do
That's
it.
a zoning exception.
Okay.
That you can absolutely control.
Okay.
Where are the standards now that Troy
Engineering.
was meant, an engineering manual?
Engineering manual.
There's nothing in chapter 14 about
Yeah,
that?
oh, there is in chapter 14.
14 also.
It's like, between your house and the street, it has to be 60% transparent. Right? You can't put a solid brick wall between your house and the street. And, it's got pictures. Here's a pole fence. Here's a 3-strand barbed wire fence. And so it's pretty well defined in 14A.
And it matches up with the engineering manual?
Yes. Yeah, it already does.
So when we get into 14, we can. look
Yeah.
at it too.
So when you guys dig into 14, you can whack it up.
Okay.
All right. So anybody in the audience have questions or confusion about fencing and where we're going now and in the future?
What would a fee look like? We like $25 or something, a little like that?
It ranges from town to town. It goes everywhere from 60 to 125.
But it's nothing prohibitive that for.
No.
I have a question.
Sure.
So you're talking about the
the responsibility of the owner to make sure that the fence is on their property. And I certainly have a fence that's falling down and we're about to replace. And we know that we need to do a survey to make sure whose property it is and sharing neighborly and making sure that it gets put up because that's been long before we were ever there, even though we've been there for well over 10 years. But my question is, who's watching and enforcing when the developer comes in and putting those perimeter fences and making sure that it's on the correct when we have an adjoining property owners?
That'll be the whole part of the permitting process, right? That's why we want the permitting, to make sure that the staff will look at that when it comes in and says, wait a minute, that's why they need to bring in the documents and do a permitting process.
But are we gonna require that the survey be done? Because
Yes.
not in every case, so
Yeah.
I can hear that audibly, because not in every case does a person, do a survey or ensure, this is my property, or obviously we want to have a developer, but, has that been done in the past, that every T has been crossed and every I has been dotted, that the developers are ensuring that these fences are in the right alignment?
Yes, that's part of the engineering review.
Okay, so even though there hasn't been a permit process, there is this oversight.
An evaluation review permitting process there, even though that it wasn't specifically required.
Am I hearing that people don't necessarily come and get permits for their fences though?
I think it's two separate things. You're
I'm talking about two separate things, yes.
Yeah, you're looking for the developer and the development in most people's mind, multiple houses, roads, et cetera, fences, to have surveys, make sure it's checked, the fence is checked against the survey. Then there's a separate fence building permit for private property people that we gotta be careful that we don't require a survey for a fence then, because then that seems egregious, but I get what you're saying.
Unless, it may be egregious, but unless we're talking about someone that has, a large property, then, that's abutting something that maybe, we could be running into, what are we looking at? I'm not trying to make the fence issue a big issue, big thing, but there could be some situations where don't you think there might be some necessity to require some surveys?
So if I might address that, the practice that has been successful for me in other communities is that rather than requiring a homeowner to come in with a full-blown survey, they are required to be given a survey or a plot plan of their property when they purchase it. That is there is no reason why the town could not accept a copy of that survey, which has been sealed, with a fence line placed on top of it saying, this is where I'm going to build my fence. Or you have a fence contractor that uses that survey at scale to indicate where their fence is going to be installed.
I just want that requirement to be,
right.
they utilize that for their fence building.
So you're not paying for a new survey just for your fence unless you want to. But having a legal document that has been sealed by a surveyor that shows your property you're intending to build it on, that's a legal document that you can go ahead and submit with your fence permit showing where I'm going to build.
Great suggestion for town staff to take to the council.
I mean, that is exactly what we've had to do in Carrollton, in Frisco, everywhere. The copy that we got when we bought the property, we just provided a copy.
Right, so Troy, you got it?
Yep.
Okay, so I think, Sue?
We have fences in town that are partially falling down. With Arkin Hill, you have one that's falling down. You can see old vehicles behind, just exposed. And occasionally we have them on Chin Chapel where they're partially falling down. Do we have any means for going around and correcting that?
I'd say in honoring Ted's thing to keep on the agenda, that's not on our agenda, but I think that's a very reasonable question. And so Troy, why don't you go ahead and answer? Because in theory, that would fall under our enforcement office.
Yeah, code enforcement. So we can look at that soon. I can follow up with you on that.
Yeah. Well, you'll see it if you go down Arkin Hill. You can't miss it from the south side.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
It's in the Lancier. I know which one she's talking about.
Yeah. Okay, so any other comments, questions on fences? Yeah, we can move on from that.
We're running about 20 minutes per topic.
Oh, yeah.
How many topics do we have? Might have dinner.
Okay, so next topic, one of the bigger issues that we talked about before was the requirement for underground services and utilities. I had said in my original comments, gee, that seems unreasonable. And Stephen goes, well, yeah, that's what you do now, and so do all the towns around you. And I said, well, I didn't know that. But so can we talk for a minute about underground utilities requirements, when required and when not required? So, maybe Matt or Stephen, you could kind of give us a primer on when does that underground utilities requirement kick in?
I'm gonna let Stephen, because you wrote it in the subdivision ordinance?
Yeah. So part of it is from the original subdivision ordinance, so it was kind of carried over.
Stephen, can you call it what section it is so we can all follow?
Sure, absolutely. We're on section 5.4, on-site utilities. Page number 61. So the intent of this as a subdivision ordinance, that creation of new subdivision means that you have to create new connections to facilities. You're going to have to create new utility lines, you're going to have to create new electrical lines, cable, all this kind of stuff. The intent of this is that we want to, where we can, for these public utilities, to keep them underground as much as possible. Underground utilities are, it's a safety thing, and we've had storms in the past couple of months that have taken out utilities, and being able to make sure that they're underground is, I think, a priority for a community. Additionally, having a lot of overhead utilities from aesthetics is not the best for your primary arterials as you're going down your roads, and so having ground-based utilities is in many ways the best policy. One of the things that we talked about was service lines that, working with, and I forget who's the
CoServe.
CoServe. Okay, so I usually work with Encore. So CoServe, I'm with Tri-County. Yeah, so I get calls a lot. Anyway, so but having a service line, if you've got a large piece of property and you're trying to get it all the way to your primary residence from the street, maybe it works best for you to have an overhead utility to that. But again, that's a service line rather than building a transmission line across your property.
So let's narrow this down a bit, because that's really the question. This section is talking about on-site utilities in a subdivision, right?
Correct.
So Chase has got 10 acres, and he wants to put a barn in the back, and he talks to CoServe, and they're going to run a wire from the street to his barn. Does not apply here.
No.
Does not apply. What about if Jeff here buys some land, and it's 10 acres, he's going to subdivide it into lots of only 4 lots? Does he have to put the utilities to those homes underground on those 4 lots?
Yes.
Okay. So I think this needs to be more clear of when it applies and when it doesn't. To me, it's kind of like, right? More situation. Yeah, what situations is it required, and what situations is it not required? So, because Chase could have a piece of property, he's going to run 2 wires to it. He's still going to be one parcel. He's not subdividing. He's just going to put a barn over here and a barn over there. He's going to run 2 wires. He can do that overhead. No problem. We don't require that. And we don't require a permit for that either. Maybe the barn, but not the wire.
Could you tie it to the plat?
Well, that's the intent of this.
Yeah.
Is that
So if
because you're creating, again, everything ties to plats because this is a subdivision ordinance. We are
Right,
creating
but
new lots.
4 or less, so a minor plat, you could still have an overhead electrical connection,
Well,
right?
the
So
intent
it
for
would be a
that is
minor,
you're not building new public infrastructure with a.
Yeah, the town is not doing anything, right?
Right, so
Right.
there's no new public infrastructure. If you're building new public infrastructure, and public infrastructure can include utilities other than water and wastewater and roads. So you're not creating new public infrastructure, you're just tying on what's already existing. Then it's a minor plat. So
Right.
if it's overhead, it's overhead. You're not having a barrier.
so I think what Mark was saying was you tie all that together so that it reads in that way, because it's kind of segmented so that you would have to kind of figure that out as opposed to what you just said.
Okay,
Yeah, so if we're doing a subdivision of 4 lots or less, if the town is gonna do something, the town will do it underground. No. If the builder is gonna put 4 houses on those 4 lots, does he have to do them underground? And you said yes. Right? So underground is on any new residential construction? What about it doesn't, on more than 1 lot?
okay, again, the way you described it was not in a minor plat type of way.
Right, okay.
Okay, what you described was 10 acres and splitting it into 4 lots. I was assuming that there was going to be, on 10 acres, you're gonna need to build a road.
Well,
I mean.
it could be along the highway, each house could have a driveway.
Sure,
But-
but so to be specific, a minor plat says no public utilities.
Says no public improvements, and we define public improvements to be what the town does, right? Not just what anybody does. I think, isn't that how we define public improvements with a
Well,
capital P?
because the town only does not provide water. Water is still a public improvement.
Okay.
I'm going to throw this out there, just kind of toss around this idea and, I want Chris and Troy. So if we say that the underground utility requirement only applies to public easements, do you think that gets you where you want to go?
Where you're dedicating it to the town.
All right, well, so
Or
maybe.
to the utility.
No, because
That's
inside
this private.
Because if Coaster comes and rips a power line system through, they're gonna require a easement, even if it's sitting along the property line or something else, most likely. So I think that's the question is a utility more than the utility itself, but does the utility require an easement? Therefore, it's public. Then, someone's gonna.
Yeah, that's the threshold question to me is not 5 and above. I think we're fairly clear on all of that.
Yeah.
The real issue is the 4 and below. And it's kind of like, okay, it used to be kind of hands off 4 and below, but you gotta have a building permit, right? You gotta make sure the fences are on. I mean, you gotta do stuff even though it's 4 and below. So the question is, does this apply to 4 and below? And I think the answer that we were going to is, well, if you subdivided and you have 4 lots and you're not building anything on it, well, fine. But if you're going to put houses on it, they've got to have electricity and water. Other towns would have sewage. And so that is going to have to be an easement on those. Some of those properties are going to have easements to get that power to their house and the water to their house. So in that case, they don't have to get out of jail free. They have to come in and they could do a minor plat, right? But it would have to show where the water and the electricity is going to be.
Correct.
Right.
So you have major arterial road that already has electrical and water available. And
Yes.
you subdivide, you don't have to touch those utilities. All you're doing is creating your service lines to that, private owned connections. If you have open land and you have to build a water line to get water to that open land to subdivide 4 lots, you have to build a road in that open land. You have to provide new electric lines that's gonna be owned by CoServe, then you're gonna have to, that's not a minor plat, because you're building new public infrastructure that's owned by somebody else.
But so let's say you got a piece of property that's right along a major road, and you want to subdivide it into 4 lots. And let's say that not all of them would have direct access to that road, so there's going to have to be a road to.
2 flag lots.
Yeah, 2 flag
It's
lots.
kind of
Yeah, you could have
2 by 2,
flag
right?
lots,
2
yeah.
flag lots and 2 in the front.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Just get your favorite topic. So
My
I think
favorite
we'd
topic.
start there.
So let's go with 2 and a 2. So you got 2 on
Yeah,
the road and
right.
2 in the back. That's the more likely scenario. The roads of the people in the back need access to the public road. We do not want them to do that by an easement. Do we?
No, we don't.
We want them to have a road to the street.
But what you just described was flag lots, and a flag lot by definition is going to have access to the
Yes.
public road.
That's why I said, no,
So that's
that doesn't count. We've already, flag lots are fine. We have nailed that one perfectly. That one's done. We don't have to worry about flag lots. We're now worrying about interior lots that are not on the street. So they would have to, what you'd have to do in the case I said, you'd have to have a cul-de-sac, one street up the middle with a little ball on it, and all 4 lots can get into it, right?
Right.
That's how you would do it. You wouldn't make 4 driveways, 2 from the back and 2 from the road. Because that's now 4 accesses onto a public road. That's too much traffic. We want 1 road down the middle for all 4 lots. That's how a developer would do
It
it.
could be a private road.
And it will be a private road.
Doesn't have to be.
Doesn't have to be, but that's pretty much our definition of a private road. 4 lots or less, according to what I just handed over there. Did you give me that back, or did you keep it?
So in your cul-de-sac with the 4 lots, would the utilities be underground?
That's what I'm saying. So that's the question. That's the thing is, public road, little street with a turning circle at the end, 4 lots. We are requiring that from the street to those 4 houses to be underground. Correct. Is everybody clear on that? Okay. So, but if Chase is building a barn on the far back of his property, that's his property. That's him and CoServe. We have no dog in that hunt.
Correct.
Okay. Any questions on public utilities underground?
So for those 4 lots on a cul-de-sac, that would not be a minor plat.
Correct.
Because you're having to put in.
Correct.
We're dedicating.
Is it too much to say that any single-family home should be underground, any new one? Is that unfair?
I
mean, we've got
that's philosophical. You can ask that.
I mean, we've got the funniest looking trees in North Texas.
Yeah.
They have to cut away for those lines. I mean,
Most of those are, well, I've got some of those too. So,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I think that's a philosophical question, and I think that would not be in the spirit of the town.
Right.
If you're going to build a single house with public access to the street, you
I'm
got
not
to do
talking
it.
barns or accessory buildings. I'm
Yeah,
talking
you're
like,
just going to build a house on a 1 or 2 acre lot. You got to have underground. No, I don't think I personally wouldn't think that would be popular. Although, if I were building a house, I would do it. From the power pole to my house, yeah, I'd put it underground.
well, you can just pay more for it, right?
Yeah, cost you a little more.
What is the cost difference?
Depends on how far it is from the
Yeah.
house.
I mean, is it significant?
Depends on
Yeah.
the utility and the
Is it?
ductwork and, yeah, significant is, that's why that whole paragraph's in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the power company or whoever will definitely consider it significant because they don't want to do it. They want to push that back on the homeowner or the city or whoever they can.
Somebody, they're happy to strain from pole to pole.
Yep.
So, but most homeowners probably would do that. I mean, if you're gonna build a $1 million home, are you really gonna have like a wire draping across your front yard?
Right.
It's gotta.
Okay, so now I want to ask a slightly different, so I think we beat the
Underground.
right to that. So now let's go to Frontier, right?
Yes.
So if I'm not mistaken, you guys keep me honest, but when Frontier, whatever they are, Spectrum was coming through town, some were underground, some were not underground, right? That's new utility lines running through town. And they're not all underground. So
that's-
based on this, would they be underground going forward?
and Matt, jump in here, but a communication is not considered a utility.
It's an exempt, I
Yeah.
think is what it is.
Yeah.
Going back to AT&T days.
Why would anything have been run above?
Correct.
I
Good
can't
thing.
tell you why, but I understand that they did both underground and above ground is what I
It's
heard.
along Copper
Yeah, they
Canyon
have.
Road.
Yeah.
It's all above ground.
And so, if we're talking about trying to clean things up, and all the reasons we just said that you don't want lines running around the trees.
This is a very reasonable question, but it's
It
not on
is.
topic because it has nothing to do with subdivisions. This is how the town contracts with outside suppliers to bring services into town.
Okay.
So perfectly reasonable question, not our problem.
Pulling the TED card on me that I can't.
Yeah. Ted wanted us to stick to the agenda. We're sticking to the agenda. Okay. So anybody else? Wait a minute,
Just
Ted's
a
got a
question.
question.
Just to clarify, if you have 10 acres, 20 acres, and you want to put a barn in the middle of that, unplatted, but you have service lines on your property, and there are service lines, and you want to extend that service line to that barn, what happens?
You call up CoServe and have them come out and do it.
No easement requirement.
No, that's not our, that's
CoServe-
private property.
CoServe will require a 15-foot deed of easement for that. But it's,
Yeah.
you know, it's just between the landowner.
And then you'll have to file something with the easement on it.
Yeah, it's just
Just a-
just a basic easement.
Yeah.
15-foot
Yeah, so-
ingress, egress, power.
The town does not get involved. That's your property. It's you and the utility fight it out. If you want to put it underground, great, you pay for it. Want it overhead, they'll do it. Or whatever they'll charge you for it.
Just
Your
a question.
cable TV question, I've got a question. Were they just hanging it on current telephone poles?
Yes.
So they didn't put in new telephone poles in or anything like that, right?
No.
It's new wires. in my
Just
point.
new wires on current, so
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the idea is for the town is limiting the number of telephone poles that are sticking out off private property.
Well, I would prefer to see the wires go away over time, right? I understand we started with poles,
Well, we're not-
but the only way you get to them going away over time is you make a decision where you legally can, that you don't allow that going forward for new installations. That was my
Right.
point.
I agree with you on that, but I mean, I'm just saying that's why they hit some underground. They wanted them underground for the most part.
Yeah, the new guys did almost entirely underground.
Correct.
So the question, well, while we're on these off topic here, why did Charter or whoever it is run all these wires and then not bother to sell them to anybody?
Because they're increasing their capabilities for network.
I mean, because
So
they
they're
they put almost all of theirs underground, and they went under roads and under driveways, so they were doing what we want them to do, which is underground.
And then they'll utilize and have to sign lease agreements to put their cable on those poles with CoServe.
Okay, again, not on topic, not subdivision, not relevant to what we're talking about.
27, since we're off topic, they claimed public utility status, just as a heads up, as part of what they were doing. So they claimed that, but then also claimed that they're an exception. So that means that we need to take our time to update some of what we're doing right now, even though it seems like it's, off topic, to make sure that we're keeping up with kind of what's happening, to make sure that we're keeping up with the times of this BIOS and, the LED lights and all the other things that are happening because of the technology that's kind of going beyond what the ordinances and some of the subdivision, all these things that are happening.
Yeah.
So.
Certainly agree.
I understand kind of what you're saying, that they're an exception, but they're still claiming that they're a public utility. So it's kind of, they're writing this line of exception that we need to make sure that we are, I'm hearing, this will cover it, but we need to be precise in our language so they can't find that loophole.
Yeah, again, I agreed with you completely,
Sorry.
but that's not part of subdivision. That's for the town's contractual engineering stuff.
Yeah.
So that none of us here have anything to do with that except for the town council people, when and if it ever comes to it.
And the reality is, if it's a new subdivision, they've got an open trench.
Yeah.
They
They
may,
put stuff.
they may run them at the same time, because you got an open trench, you can put multiple lines in there. As long as
Okay.
they're shielded.
Any other comments on underground utilities? Okay, I think we put that one to bed. Okay, so we got done fences, overheads, permits. One of the other open issues that we were talking about, and I think from just a lack of memory here, was private drives. What's, can they be gravel or what? So we actually have really good engineering standards on what, and we've got definitions of what is a private drive, what is a driveway. They may not be absolutely perfectly outstandingly clear, but we do have, and so I've lost my version.
I think I have it.
You have it? Okay.
You gave us your copy so we can look at it.
Okay. All right. That's what I thought. Okay. So, thank you, Matt.
You're welcome.
So this is in our engineering standards, and I know everybody has this memorized, 2.09, private street/road. And so, again, I think this is just a clarified point of order. I'm not sure anything needs to be done to this document. I'm not sure. Maybe Stephen has a different point, but I'm thinking this is all in the engineering standards, not in the subdivision. But a private street or road is defined as a roadway serving a minimum of 2 lots and a maximum of 4 lots. So there's our 4 lot thing again. That can be a private street or road up to 4 lots. It's more than 4 lots, not a private road, which are not dedicated to the public and are not maintained by the town. So again, a private road is, the owner's got to take care of it. Private streets and roads do not require pavement, but must be designed as an all-weather road and must be able to support an 85,000-pound fire truck. So again, if it's a private street or road, it can be whatever you want to make it out of, so long as it supports an 85,000-pound fire truck. So applicants must provide a letter from a licensed professional engineer in the state of Texas indicating that the proposed roadway and any necessary culverts will support that load. Applicants must provide a letter from ESD number 1 indicating that the proposed road will meet their requirements for access. Private roads must be maintained by the property's owners that are served by the road. Deed restrictions or maintenance agreements or HOA must be provided to ensure the maintenance. Private road must be kept maintained sufficiently to provide emergency vehicle access. Town reserves the right based on input from ESD 1 to require the property owners to perform maintenance should the road deteriorate to the level that emergency access is not afforded. And we've even got a wonderful little table in here, which I guess you probably can't pull it up, but we can look at it. Driveways is for 1 house. A driveway is, in theory, from the access point to your garage. So on your property, that's a driveway. I think most people know what a driveway is. A private road serves 2 to 4 lots. A subdivision road serves 4 lots or more. That's what we just talked about, the little cul-de-sac. That little cul-de-sac would be a private road. Although it would have public easements on it, it would be a private road. All of them, there's no surface requirement on a driveway or a private road, other than where the private road meets a town road. You've got to have a concrete apron and you've got to have a concrete culvert underneath it with concrete head walls. Other than that protection of our town road, the driveway or the private road can be whatever material you want, so long as it supports an 85,000-pound fire truck. Does that help clarify, Chase, is your question about can my private drive?
Yeah, no.
This is town standards.
Yeah.
So any confusion on what's a driveway, what's a private road, and what's a subdivision road, and what's a town road? I mean, the subdivision road could be maintained by the developer or the HOA.
So I was just going to ask that, is that subdivision road or subdivision street the defined terminology in here?
No, it's just more than 4 lots, a road that serves more than 4 lots.
That's in the
Engineering.
Well, that is, but do we need to tie that definition? Because we do talk about the subdivision ordinance, streets.
Mhm.
And so do we need to have some kind of language or definition in the subdivision ordinance that clarifies?
I would suggest that there is room in the definitions in the back. There's like street private is one of the blank spots in the definitions. I would suggest even that you just take these engineering standards and put them in the definitions in the back. Say what a private street road is. So I think that would solve it.
Do you have a page number,
For which?
which you just talked about?
Well, it's in the engineering code. It's in the engineering code. So you won't have it in front of you.
On page 83
is the definition.
Is the definition of street.
Which will add the private street definition to
Yeah, it's got
align
street
with
private.
the engine.
Yeah, instead of street, it's just street lights, road
Yeah.
private.
Okay.
Because it's still private, even though it serves more than four. That's the clarification that you really help state there.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
even though it's technically a private road, it's not defined by the town as a private road, it's defined as a subdivision road after it's over the fourth. But
Okay, well, as soon as Stephen is back with us.
I do need to go back to the utilities. Yeah, so you got in here, the first sentence, all existing, I was assuming existing weren't required to be buried, but the way this is written, all existing utilities in conjunction with development, which a development could be building a house, have to be buried. So you got a house you're gonna build and serviced by a half-mile long overhead power line. This would potentially require it to be buried. And if it's existing, I thought that was not gonna be required.
Doesn't the save and accept transmission facilities as identified by the utility company exempt that? Please.
I don't know, I just want to be clear that existing.
5.4. So all existing on-site overhead utilities, and then it says save and accept transmission facilities as identified, and all new will be placed underground. But I think that's the exception in that, between the commas.
But I think that's
Save and accept.
T&D, like high tension wires.
Yeah, that's talking about like the big power lines, you're not
Okay.
required.
That's legal language
yeah,
for our
yeah,
attorney to
yes.
decipher.
I'm still trying to catch up where y'all are right now.
That's
Page 61.
Section 5.4.
Page 61.
It's one of those legal terms.
Yeah, I think all new utilities in conjunction with the development and the planning of the property should be how it reads, not all existing.
If this is what you're talking about, is essentially getting people to, who might have
Which section?
overhead utilities now,
Yeah.
pushing them to relocate them below. That's the purpose of this, as it's written right now, I think.
I think that's right, and I think that's a good point, Chase. I mean, we are not forcing everyone who has overhead lines now to put them underground. That's not the requirement here. That's only if somebody comes in with something new.
No, but that's not the way it reads.
Yeah, you see, Stephen, you see where we are on 5.4A, it says all existing. That implies that everything's got to be put underground, just everybody's got to go out and do it right now. That's not what we mean. So I think if you just eliminated the word existing, you'd probably be fine.
Just anything that's new in relationship to a development or planning, something along those lines. We're not prohibiting somebody running a line to back of the property for something else, but if it's a development, everything's got to go underground. But the existing requirement to bury them, that could be a gotcha, if, you know, in the example, you're trying to build something in the back property, here's what we've already got lines back there. Now you're going to require to put it underground, it would be extremely cost prohibitive.
All right, Stephen, you with us? You got it.
I am, I'm just,
Mulling.
yeah,
Again, I think if we take out the word existing, that, because existing sounds like it's out there now, you got to do something about it.
And replace it with new.
Yeah, I think,
If you do it,
well, it says all new on-site extensions.
That's true.
you just cut it right. You just
You
start
got
right
it there
here.
too.
Just start right here. That's the beginning of the sentence.
No, you need the accept transmission facilities in it too, so you can.
I'd love for them to bury those.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Yeah, they aren't gonna do it. Yeah,
Figure
yeah.
that one out.
scared to death
Okay.
every time they show up.
So as soon as Steven tells us he's figured out the answer, we'll move on.
So let's do this on the fly.
Matt, you got a thought? You see the problem. That word existing just is what sets off red flags.
Well, are we trying to?
Is this in the current one? It is. Okay. Man, I'm trying to say, what is the intent here?
I was gonna look it up.
That was my question.
Yeah.
What's the intent? Are we trying to get people that, as they go from a single lot, that might have an overhead?
You know, it really isn't, it's really for new development subdivisions.
Right.
And so that if you've got a frontage onto a road and the subdivision's coming in, and that you've got overhead lines that are, even if they're transmission lines, kind of thing, take them underground, cleans up the road, that's the intent of that. You know, it's not intending for, again, a single family house to, I don't have the internet right now, so.
All right, so,
And I'm guessing that's probably even in our existing ordinance.
And it's in every.
Yeah,
ordinance around.
it's just, it could be used the wrong way. Not that we enforce that, I mean, we still have people
Right.
extend lines, but
Again,
now that we're talking about it.
I think again, I come from working for many types of different municipalities, rural to very urban ones. And it really does protect the town being able to say, well, we've got these lines here that really need to be put underground. You're causing new development to occur, let's take these all underground.
Sounds great, yeah, maybe there's a halfway point to when that gets triggered. Certain number of lots, certain size of lots, because the way it's written, for one person to build a house, it would technically trigger that.
well, okay, so Stephen, we got a developer, he's gonna develop 100 lots.
Right.
Okay, he's gonna put those all underground. Are we saying that CoServe has got to put their transmission line to that subdivision underground?
Well, typically what's gonna happen is that there's usually, service to the edge of the lot, to the
Right.
edge of the property or whatnot, that may be already, overhead or along the side that's gonna be, already existing there. And so, that all of those would be taken underground, but because you're gonna have to add additional,
Switching.
switches, all the additional, accoutrements to be able to just, handle. the load
But
that's gonna go on.
but I'm talking about, there's a line that runs down the street to this subdivision. He doesn't have to go all the way back to the transmission facility, put all of that underground because he's gonna be underground on this.
Right.
It's on this subdivision it needs to be underground.
So-
It's not to get to the subdivision.
we've had properties all over the place in the previous city I worked with that had overhead lines that were historic. We said, well, you're going to, put those underground to, so they would have to build new lines underground, even though it's a vacant lot, to build in.
So I think, so for example, if you take Copper Knolls Estates, if we put this requirement in place, they would go underground on their property. And then as soon as they got to the other side, they would go back above ground until the next guy develops his property, then he would drop underground.
Well,
So I think that's the intent.
That's what I'm asking, is it's like, you're not asking CoServe to go back and put every line in town from their
No.
switching station to
No.
this subdivision
It's
underground because they're building a subdivision.
You're saying on a go-forward basis.
On a go-forward
Yes.
basis, if you're gonna put this, anything that's related to this subdivision goes underground. But it's gonna come in on an overhead line, and then it goes underground. And if it goes out the other side, they can pull it up out of the ground and put it overhead going the other way, right? So it's got nothing to do with what's on our property or the town's property. This is not touching that.
And that's what they've done at Palace Knoll, for example.
Yeah, they just
They've got a
raised up
line
the poles.
above,
Yeah.
because it's $24.99, but then we'll have to go under.
Yeah.
Is the concern with like smaller developments, like 1 or 2 lots, or?
No, I think it's just the concern that, as I understood Chase's concern, is this says like, I have a house and right now I've got no, I gotta go put it underground right now. I gotta do it.
I don't think it says that. It's if you were going to do anything, you would have to put it underground. Building permit.
Yeah.
Triggers that.
Say,
word.
okay, I've got a house, I'm gonna build a barn, I've got overhead line to my house. Oh, now it's because I'm building a barn to run electricity. I've got to go underground
Yeah,
from the.
I guess even if you do have a house, the way it reads,
Yeah.
any development.
Yeah.
I mean, all existing
Pulling
is
well,
everything
Well,
that's.
you need to remember that all of this is going to be applied to a plat application. So it's for plats.
So if it's not being.
If it's not being platted, then it
But
does not require it.
There's certain instances that it would have to be platted.
So maybe that's the solution, is just put in regards to plat applications, blank, all of this has to, right? Just make it clear that this only applies to plats.
Right. That's what I was trying to get is like, is there like a limit on subdivisions that's a concern or just,
But then you're still requiring, when it's written, any existing utilities to be buried. And that's, I mean, that's.
For new plats.
Yeah, I mean, we've got to have some definition on when that gets triggered. But, you go have a 5-acre parcel that's got an overhead line in it, and you want to build a house, now you got to bury that line. And also, say you got a parcel that an overhead line goes over that and a couple others, those sort of won't go down and then back up. They don't like doing that. So it's.
But if you're just building a house on your property, you need a building permit, but you're not doing a plat because it's unplatted. Right,
Yeah,
so this doesn't affect you. Because you're not filing a plat.
Okay.
You have a minor plat.
No, not if you're just kind of doing your own lot. Minor plats are if you're doing a subdivision
Right.
of 4 lots. You want.
Right.
Well, we may need to further talk about that, just because the language is very delicate.
Right.
Okay, so.
So this is your current language. I'm sorry, I got it. There we go. This is your current language out of your ordinance right now. All existing on-site overhead utilities, save and except transmission facilities. That is. That is the exact same language as your current ordinance.
Right.
Oh, I'm not saying it wasn't like that. It's just something that I'm starting to read through and go, okay, this could go not exactly as we intended.
Okay. Let me point out one thing in general for the audience. This committee is going to submit this to the town council for approval. There's no timeline on when it gets submitted. There is no rush to submit it other than the fact that we are not in compliance. We haven't made it easy for our staff and we are not necessarily in compliance with state law. So yeah, we'd like to get this done expeditiously, but there is no pressure to get this done. So that's an important thing to remember here. And number 2, the Texas states, my uncle always used to say that nobody is safe when the legislature is in session. So there will be changes, maybe in this session, that could be drastic, that could have enormous impact on this. Now, does that mean we should wait and see what it is? Well, no. I think you go ahead and do the best you can under the circumstances instead of waiting for them to, in their almightiness, to come down with what they think we ought to do next. But that means that this document is a living document. It will change every 2 years when the legislature does whatever the hell they're going to do. And it may change in between as the citizens go to the council and say, this makes no sense. Let's do it different. So there is no reason to hold this document until the legislature does their work. I think knowing what we know now, we want to be in compliance with the Texas law as it is now. We want to get this done expeditiously so the town is operating on a clean basis. But if it takes another month to do that, that's fine too. We don't have to do anything tonight. It'd be nice, but it's not required. So, I mean, is everybody clear on the kind of what the timing issues here are? There are no timing issues. This is You know, we will have a different town council in a month, more or less. They can change it all up again if they want. This is a living document. It's always subject to change. Not cast in concrete. It's just for the current situation we're in right now. Okay? So, I suggest, as a non-member of the committee, that everybody ignore Chase and accept this as it is right now. This has been in our document, and if he as a town council person wants to bring it up for change in the next town council meeting, more power to it. That's my unbiased, independent suggestion. So it's up to David and Mitch and Kim to, as committee members, to decide what the hell they want to do.
Could you just say upon any new development or any new subdivision?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I accept our attorneys, if he can stick a phrase in there that solves Chase's problem, let's do it tonight and get it over.
So I think I'm getting there, but I'm still trying to get, so we start the sentence with when a plat is required under this ordinance.
Okay.
And then I don't know if that gets us there completely, but it's a start and I'm still thinking.
Okay.
Yeah.
So.
Can I say something? If we're not in a hurry, why not give him the chance to speak?
That's what I'm going to say, is that he can think about it.
Matt, we want to see how you do thinking on your.
Yeah. How many balls can you juggle? Well, hang on a second. Just let me finish that sentence and then yes. Okay, so again, that was my suggestion, is let's just leave it as it is right now, unless Stephen and Matt have a solution, which they can relay to the committee at their next, because the committee is going to have to meet again to approve this. Until they see it all together, they can't approve it. So I'm assuming there's going to be another committee meeting that's not a P&Z workshop. It's a committee meeting, and they're going to say yes or no. So at that meeting, Matt and Stephen can present their conclusions. So we don't need to do it tonight.
I think if they target on two phrases, one is the all existing and the other one is any property. And that if you focus on those two, try to drill down on that.
Well, there are times we're going to want existing to go underground. And so, if you're putting in a subdivision and, those underground or those overground facilities are in the way, they're going to have to go away. So the town does
That's a
need.
little bit more situational though. That's more targeted than what it's saying right now. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. So I just think we need to leave the ability to have that. And again, it's only going to apply to plats, and I think we can get there. And we'll recommend some language, and then of course the council will see it, and
Okay.
At the town's discretion.
Yeah, correct.
So, Sue.
Well, first of all, thank you all for the time you're spending on this. Subdivision ordinances are no fun. And the town has more or less been flying legally blind for 5 years. Matt, this is not a reflection on you at all. It's prior experience. I'm a former city attorney and former mayor here for 14 years. I think Matt needs a chance to go back over this, to look at it, to think about it. And I would like for him, if he makes a final decision, to please put it in writing. We had an attorney who would put nothing in writing, and that was a problem. And then I think you can rely on that when you know it's legally accurate as of this date or the date you adopted. And I think that's very important for you to not expose yourself when you don't know for sure that this is a legally up-to-date document. You need to be sure of that. Then put your name on it.
Right.
Thank you.
So, and I think we're agreed that what you just said is what we agreed. Right. So we're not going to do anything further tonight. Matt is going to go look at it. He's going to come back to the committee with his recommendations for language in their next draft.
Well, that's just something to point back to as far as intent.
Yeah.
Because we're all asking the question, what was our intent? And none of us can actually answer that question.
Were there any other problematic sections in here besides, was this the last one?
No, don't think.
I mean, do we need to give him targets?
No. Well,
Wait,
you're the
wait,
committee. The committee can give them whatever they
last
want.
Wait, Sheila, I have a question for you. Last week, we did talk about bringing this to town council on the. Oh, okay.
Possibly, yeah.
Okay,
That's not
so,
what I had worked.
so is that the time box that we're going to look at?
Not
Or,
required.
or do we
You're the
want
committee, not
to?
me.
It's
You
the
guys,
target.
it's a target.
That- Okay,
It's a soft
I
target.
think it's a safe target. It's not necessary. I mean,
Okay.
you want to make sure it's right
yep, okay,
within the context of what we know today.
okay. I was just distracting what we did, last week and
Because the
making sure
council's
that
meeting
we're.
again on May 12th or
28th.
28th. So I mean, it's, if you miss this month, it goes
Usually May
next month.
12th, yeah.
But again,
Okay.
that's entirely the committee's decision. I mean, you're a voting member of the committee, so whatever.
I don't know if we need we might need to meet again. That's up to us if we want to meet again about this. We could circulate it electronically once we have those additional changes captured. We could circulate it electronically and come.
Do a red line. Yeah, a red line that just the changes since this.
Correct. Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, so Jeff had a question.
No,
Withdrawn. Okay, let's go forward to where we were before we went back. Private roads and streets. We've got our engineering standard. The suggestion was that we put the definition of private roads in the definitions back on page, what, 81, something like that, where it's got street, comma, private, needs a definition, and you could pull it straight out of our engineering. I'll leave this with you if you want.
I emailed you a copy of that. So you've got it.
So that, and I think that resolved our streets, comma, roads question. Right? Anybody have anything further on private roads, driveways, gravel or concrete or whatever? No? Okay.
Stephen, it was the subdivision road to add.
I'm sorry, subdivision. Yeah, subdivision, not engineering. Subdivision 2.09. Okay. So as far as I know, although I'm not saying it is, we had one other question, which was the American Farm and Ranch stake thing that Chase put on us, the protection and preservation of agricultural operations. And David had put some thought into this. And David, did you have anything you wanted to recommend?
I do. This is section 251, or chapter 251 of the agricultural code. So, I mean, this is a state statute, and like all state statutes, we're going to do our best to comply with it and would have no reason not to comply with it. But I do think that, and I spoke with council, I spoke with Stan this morning about this. And there's, academically or legally, there's no reason to mention this, right? I mean, if we were going to mention it,
When did
could
you
be
stop
implying
beating your
that we
wife?
don't intend to comply with others, and that's absolutely not the case. But given the nature of Copper Canyon, our history, and I think generally residents' desire to maintain a more rural agricultural environment, I think it's a good idea to make a reference to it I think it's a good idea to make a reference to it and to say simply that nothing in this document should be construed to conflict or deny a property, deny owners rights of that particular statute. And it doesn't have to be anything more complicated than that, I don't think. I'll bounce that language off of you. That's what I shared with you
Right.
today.
But if you do that, then why wouldn't you do it for any other statute?
You're right.
Right? I mean, then you've got an amendment that's 13 pages long for a 13-page.
Oh, it would be at least 13 pages.
So I mean, like, I don't understand why
Here's all the laws we're not
I
gonna
don't
buy.
understand why we would mention it explicitly.
So let me give you a for instance.
I mean, I've read it. I know what it is.
So Stephen built this document by looking at Lantana, Highland Village, et cetera, et cetera. Show me any tax, ag exempt properties in Lantana. Show me any ag exempt properties in Highland Village. I mean, we are very different than the surrounding towns. And we want to keep it that way. And this town is adamant about being rural, equestrian, et cetera. So I think Dave's sentiment here was to do something somewhere in this document that acknowledges we're not like all those other Lantana, Howland Village. We want to build it out. We're looking for development.
What's the purpose of putting it in? I don't, nobody's explained to me why
To
you
show
put
that
it
we
in
want to
versus don't
protect,
put it in.
I think the goal was to
You're
protect.
legally obligated to anyway. That's back to my
You're right.
listing everything out.
You're 100% correct.
Yes, and you're right. No, not wrong at all.
Why do you shine a flashlight on one specific statute in your ordinances versus all the other ones? I see no
Because-
reason to do that. I
because-
get that we're different, but so what? I mean,
We want to show that we are, again, I'm not
Yeah.
advocating, I'm just saying what
Yeah.
the thought was. That we want to make it clear that we want to protect our rural equestrian environment and not, and.
I have that tattooed on my back from the last, whatever it's been.
Yeah,
now,
because every
6 years.
year. Rural equestrian.
Yeah, P&Z, I got it.
That's right. Yeah, so I think that was the thought, was to give something somewhere in this document, maybe not that, maybe not a reference to it, but just something that gives a recognition that we are not out to develop the crap out of this town. We're trying to maintain a rural environment, and we want to protect those people among us, including me and you and others that have agricultural exemptions.
Could put that in the next master plan.
That there is never going to be another.
There better be.
You're right. So legally,
Not
I
required.
have no reason to do this whatsoever. But I think particularly within this ordinance, where we're using this to sort of guide the development, at the same time, we're saying, look, we respect that that's the nature of this community, that it is a little bit different. Right? It doesn't have any legal effect.
What about putting it in a preamble or a opening paragraph or in the ordinance itself? You know, just to say,
Yeah,
look,
absolutely.
in order to protect the existing
So
nature.
Matt,
I still don't understand what we're accomplishing by doing it.
Yeah.
well, I
You're
think
not
this,
accomplishing anything except to give the message that we are.
Did it create
This- this came up-
Painfully clear
well,
for
this
anybody who's
came up
involved in this
last,
town.
this came
Yeah.
up last week when we were talking about fencing. That's when this came up. And so, yes, and fencing has been addressed, but that's how this whole thing kind of came up. But when you sent it out, something caught my attention, and I am not legal at all, but it does say about the town can't be held responsible, and then it goes on to say things like, unless you can prove there's imminent danger of explosion, flooding, and then it says an infestation of varmint or insects, which could absolutely occur in a rural, you have horses and flies and stuff, I know. So there are a couple things listed there that are very pertinent to a rural community that I think it's important that we have that addressed in here, because a developer can come in and then if you're up against, a pasture, there could be some then contention between the new neighbors who have their acre lot, and then they're up against the cow horse pasture, which they could come in and say that there's something like this. So, and again, I don't even know if that's anything, but it did jump out at me. And so because we are rural, we do have cows and horses and things that it might pertain to this. So I just wanted to call that out.
So the gist of that statute is that cities can't pass an ordinance that interferes with the traditional agricultural, what do they call it? Operations. That's what it was. And then Texas A&M AgriLife has developed, the traditional, what you can and can't pass. So, this, what we're really talking about is a nuisance. Like what can the city do to enforce nuisances? And I'll give you, I've dealt with the statute in another city where someone tried to use it. They said the city couldn't make them mow their grass next to the highway or next to the road. Because, right. So, and that was the city's nuisance ordinance, right? But then he also argued that, I can park my truck on the land and all these other things. I don't really care, but you can park your truck wherever he wants. But those are the types of things that it's aimed at. It's aimed at like nuisances. And really that's it. And also I'll point out, there's a preemption statute in the first chapter of that cultural code that basically any ordinance that contradicts that code is preempted.
Is what?
Preempted.
So, you're absolutely right.
I mean, otherwise, just go through the whole subdivision, this document that we've spent 6 months on now, and just rectify it by taking pieces out of the Farm Act and changing stuff here to match it.
No,
I mean, I'm just saying, but I mean, that's the extreme version of what we're talking about. We have statutes all over the place. We abide by those statutes. So those statutes override what the city's ordinances are. They take precedent. It is what it is. But I don't know why you call it out or make a big deal out of it. It is what it is. It's how it works.
How do other agriculturally focused communities deal with this?
I'm trying to think of another client. I can't think of one right now.
One of the things is that it's still fairly new, being passed in 2023. A lot of communities have not come up with language that would do that. I haven't seen it being applied anywhere in a subdivision ordinance.
But nobody's rushing to change their subdivision ordinance.
No, I really think Mac's correct in that it really applies to your nuisance ordinances. It applies to certain requirements for construction or other kinds of things that would require building. You can't require certain building materials by state law now, but you might apply it to a accessory building kind of thing. There's a little wiggle room on that. But I think what we're trying to do is protect agricultural operations, livestock, crop farms, other kinds of things in that regard without encroaching in predominantly aesthetics and zoning. Those are the things that really apply to how you change and develop and design your property as opposed to the subdivision ordinance, which is really trying to make sure that public infrastructure is appropriately placed and we have a process to subdivide one problem lot from another.
Okay, so the reason we're discussing this is because it was brought up at the last meeting and we asked staff to distribute. Staff has distributed. We've discussed. This is a subject for the committee. Dave's on the committee, Jason on the committee, Mitch on the committee. We can give them gloves. They can go in the back room, duke it out, whatever. That's a committee thing, not for us to deal with tonight. Is that fair enough?
Absolutely fair. Yeah.
Okay, so we saw. What other major topics, Stephen, was on your list, or Troy on your list, or Chase on your list that we have not discussed tonight that was hanging open from the last meeting?
I think we covered it all.
There was one other thing. I hope you saw the flow chart that
Yes, flow
that
chart.
Mark put together. It is very descriptive and goes into the things. My opinion is that should be a fluid document that is available to be placed on the town's website in association with making an application to the town. I don't think it should be in your ordinance because you want it to be fluid. If something changes fairly quickly, then you can just go ahead and change that flow chart and say, oh, we're doing it this way differently. And so that way it can become an administrative change and we don't have to go back to city council to change the flow chart in the ordinance.
Okay, so, and I don't disagree with that philosophy, but I would kind of go, whenever you have two versions of a chart, there's always room for misinterpretations or lack of synchronicity. So I think the posting of the detailed flow chart on the website is wonderful and absolutely useful. I guess my argument would be to not have a flow chart in here because it's too abbreviated to be of much use. And it may, in time, vary from that. And then, like I say, you'd have to do a change. You can change that flow chart over there on the website without having to go back to council or anything. So my suggestion would be to not have a flow chart in here at all, because it's just to get it in here, it's got to be very abbreviated, which leaves out a lot of vital information. That's just, again, my suggestion to the committee.
I think, what do you recommend?
Yeah, because you're still gonna have to go back to the actual document to figure out
Yeah.
what bullet points you have to check off anyway.
The flow chart is nothing more than a nice cheat sheet,
Right, that's the idea.
but it's not an all-encompassing document.
Right, yeah.
All right, we'll take it out.
And it's really small.
But I would think the developer would probably jump to that right away than read through this.
Well, yeah.
I think.
Yeah, but
So
again.
if it's on the website, he can get it there.
Yeah, he can get both of them. They're all going to be available.
Danny mentioned last week that there was some software that would potentially help the town.
Right.
Keeping up with.
Yeah, we're looking into that. I've called a couple folks and just waiting for their getting information back from them.
All right, other major topics that are even minor topics that we need, that the committee needs guidance on before they go do their final review. Room for more public input. I know the committee just loves hearing, so. All righty. Well, hearing, is there any further business to bring before the P&Z meeting tonight? Workshop. Well, hearing none, I declare this meeting adjourned at 20:08. Thank you, everybody. Really very much appreciated. Thank you, Matt. Stephen, thank you.
Thank you.
You guys get together again?
Yes, once again. Wait till the 21st.